All right, well, tonight I'm actually going to just be giving you guys a talk that I gave our high schoolers at retreat about their education. So, Cassidy and Charlie, I'm sorry, because you've already heard this, and Bob and all the faculty members. But, and I didn't rewrite it at all. So, I'm speaking directly to them in the talk, but I think it's important for you to know the way we communicate, particularly about upper school education, where people need to start owning their own responsibility in education. So it's appropriate when talking about high schoolers to be talking to them rather than just about them. And so I didn't change the second person that I use, even though I'm really talking to the high schoolers. Though, of course, any of these principles would apply even more so to our college students. When we went on the high school retreat last week, wow, feels like a lifetime ago. When we went last week, Chris Yee, who did the organization of the retreat, asked me to talk 5 different times about various principles that were really important for us to pass on to our high schoolers so they could sort of own them and know them themselves. What we ended up doing was starting by talking about this ownership of one's education, and then we talked about why we read what we read. We had a night where we discussed every rule that we apply to them in the school, and gave them the chance to object or talk about it. The one objection we got was open-toed shoes. They all wanted to wear sandals. Okay, guys, you can wear sandals, I guess. And we talked a little bit about our cell phone use policy, which is a little unusual, and some of those kind of things. So this was my first talk to them, and one of the things that I think is most important for us to communicate with, especially our older students. A lot of the principles in this talk are some of the things that have driven many of my major life choices, particularly when it comes to my career. And I think that's also true of our faculty members. If he talks, that's fine. I don't mind baby talks for either of them. High school is a time when you, the high schooler, are meant to be growing up. You are being ushered into adulthood, or at least you should be. You should be hearing, because I said so, or because those are the rules, less and less as you get older, and you should be told why things happen or why someone thinks something is good instead. It is the adult's job around you to invite you to join us in adulthood. And becoming an adult means, among other things, making meaningful choices for yourself. This is also one of the things that makes high school, in particular, a really difficult time, by the way. You're developing your moral and sensible beliefs and preferences for yourself, and yet you have relatively little control over how you live those things out, or at least about the circumstances in which you live. If and where your desires and your beliefs develop to be different from your parents, and to a lesser extent your schools, you are having a very adult experience, an adult preference, forming a value, without the ability to enact that value that adults have. It could be something as simple as an aesthetic value, like you like totally different music from your parents now, or as significant as a religious one, in which you don't have the exact same beliefs as your parents, or you want to practice them in a different way. These are really important, and it's the right time in high school to start to form these. But your life is still very much dictated by your parents and their choices, from where you live to where you go to school. Some of the students we talked to on the retreat didn't necessarily want to be there, and yet there they were. These developing differences are normal and good. And from the time that you were an infant, you were growing in separation from your parents in order to become fully your own, fully formed human being. And this is where school comes in. Throughout the course of childhood, your family, your church, and your school are charged with the job of helping to form you into a good, happy, and healthy person. Where parents, churches, and schools fail you, they are at great fault. An adult's job is to take care of the children in their lives and to love them and care for them and protect them and provide for them, and then help them become an adult. You are at the place now where it is time to start to form the kind of adult that you want to be, and to find the adults who will help you do it. It is their job. It is my job to introduce you to the world in all of its goodness and truth and beauty, error, sadness, pain, and to show you what we have found to be good and true, with the hopes that you too will come to know the good and the true and the beautiful in the world around you and beyond it. So, the week of retreat, that's what we want to do, plainly and honestly. We wanted to lay our cards in front of the kids and invite them to join us, to encourage them to form the values and desires that are in line with what we think is good, but to do so only when they actually believed it to be good, to think through it for themselves and to believe it to be good. So I went on to say to them, no one here is ever going to ask you to do or think or believe a thing because we said so. I don't even think it is possible for someone to think a thing because someone else told them to do it. So I wouldn't ever bother trying. I will, however, do my very best to persuade you, to argue with you, to tell you why we've made the decisions that we have, and to listen to you in your responses. There's another reason why I think this idea is really important for you to understand, and that has to do with an educational theory on which classical schools base a lot of their curriculum, or at least they are meant to. I actually think they often back down when it comes to this stage that we're about to talk about, and so it's where I'm going to focus tonight, because it's a hard thing for a school to do. In Dorothy Sayers' essay, The Lost Tools of Learning, she describes a sort of imaginative retelling of a medieval model of education, one based on what she calls the trivium and the quadrivium of classical subject areas, which are, by the way, the grammar, logic, or dialectic, and rhetoric in the trivium, and arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music in the quadrivium. She doesn't really focus on the quadrivium at all, just talks about the trivium. In Sayers' understanding, the trivium study of grammar, logic, and rhetoric aren't just three subjects that you study, but instead they're three ways in which we learn how to learn, ways that correspond with a student's natural development. She would say it something like this. You have to learn the grammar of a thing before you can know much about it. In order to learn a language, you have to learn words, parts of sentences, verbs, nouns, subjects, predicates, and that sort of stuff. The same applies to history through the learning of basic facts, names and dates, or through math when you learn your timetables or how to add. You are learning processes and basic units of information that you have to have in order to advance your learning at all. You can't think too many interesting thoughts about Napoleon until you know he existed and you know where and when. And that's the grammar of the subject, just kind of the facts of the thing. Young children are, it turns out, excellent at this. They're excellent at retaining facts because, quite honestly, there's not much else going on in their heads to distract them. The logic stage is where a student learns how to argue and begins to question what he's learned. Ideally, we would help a student move into a logic stage of their education around 12 or so, when their brains are naturally starting to ask a lot of questions. Any of you who have ever met a junior higher will know that that's just a very natural stage of development. Two-year-olds are like this too, but it's a little early. They're gonna ask why a lot. They're gonna wanna know the reasons behind the decisions that are being made for them, and this is natural and good. It's their minds developing in the way that they're supposed to. Many of our high schoolers are probably still there, or at least they're living in this stage a lot because they haven't been asked to do it sufficiently enough before. When they get to a great books class or a logic class, or maybe some of the more interesting concepts in math or science, they're going to run up against times where they've had to argue, question initial ideas, and come to new understandings. Those annoying and aggravating, sometimes even angering disagreements that they have in class or over lunch are a hugely important part of learning how to learn. If we don't disagree with people and test out our own ideas by speaking them aloud and trying to defend them, we don't go through this really important development of learning how to form good ideas and right opinions and how to discern for yourself the good from the bad, rather than relying on other people to do it for you. Unfortunately, too many of us also just stay right here in the logic stage without ever moving on to where we're really supposed to be before we finish high school. Actually, I think too many schools have students stuck in pre-grammar or grammar stages only. If you think about a lot of Christian schools, they often are more focused on making sure students memorize and hold a right set of beliefs and ideas without stopping to be concerned about how well, hi Galen, about how well those students actually understand them. I think this is an enormous mistake. One of the great tragedies of modern education, in fact. We saw all the time students coming out of Christian schools who had never been allowed to wrestle with the more powerful objections to their faith or to their way of life. And it was just too easy for a kind of interesting and provocative philosophy professor to knock them off a pedestal they never should have been on in the first place. And it's very disorienting for a lot of students because they've been surrounded by only a certain kind of idea that they know they're supposed to accept. And this just isn't a safe way to educate anyone. We have, you may notice, wholeheartedly rejected this fear at the St. Constantine School in favor of giving our students the best and the worst ideas human beings have come up with and helping them to think really, really hard about them. But like I said, we aren't even meant to stay right here with just good argumentation. Our development of our learning how to learn doesn't end with argument. Let me quote Dorothy Sayers directly as she talks about what a high schooler should be experiencing. Towards the close of this, the logic stage, the pupils will probably be beginning to discover for themselves that their knowledge and experience are insufficient and that their trained intelligences need a great deal more material to chew upon. The imagination will reawaken and prompt them to suspect the limitations of their logic and reason. This means that they are passing into a poetic age and are ready to embark on the study of rhetoric. The doors of the storehouse of knowledge should now be thrown open to them to browse about as they will. The things once learned by rote will now be seen in new contexts. The things once coldly analyzed can now be brought together to form a new synthesis. Here and there, a sudden insight will bring about that most exciting of all discoveries, the realization that true things are true. It is difficult to map out any general syllabus for the study of rhetoric. A certain freedom is demanded. In literature, appreciation should be again allowed to take the lead over destructive criticism, and self-expression in writing can go forward, with its tools now sharpened to cut clean and observe proportion. Any child who already shows a disposition to specialize should be given his head, for when the use of the tools have been really well and truly learned, they are available for any study whatever. It should be well, I think, that each pupil should learn to do one or two subjects really well, while taking a few classes in subsidiary subjects so as to keep his mind open to the interrelations of all knowledge. Indeed, at this stage, our difficulty will be to keep subjects apart, for dialectic will have shown all branches of learning to be interrelated, so rhetoric will tend to show that all knowledge is actually one. We should at least insist that children who seem inclined to specialize on mathematic or scientific side should be obliged to attend some lessons in the humanities and vice versa. At this stage also, the Latin grammar, having done its good work, may be dropped for those who prefer to carry on their language studies in the modern side, while those who are likely never to have any great use or aptitude for mathematics might also be allowed to rest more or less upon their oars. Students generally think that sounds really good. Generally speaking, whatsoever is mere apparatus may now be allowed to fall into the background, while the trained mind is gradually prepared for specialization in the subjects which, when the trivium is completed, it should be perfectly well equipped to tackle on its own. I want you to hear what she's saying here. The goal of the grammar and the logic stage of education is to set a student free to study whatever they're meant to study. Grammar school and junior high or logic school are meant to prepare a student for the art of being in high school. Once you have tackled and mastered the tools, you get to make something with them, something that is yours alone. Remember, she says that the doors of the storehouse of knowledge should be thrown open to them to browse about as they will. This, I think, is a beautiful expression of the goal of high school. We want to grow to a point that we can totally set our students free to browse about as they will, knowing that they are ready to do great good with that freedom. I hope that this is an exciting vision for you and for all of our students. And I want to ask you, what would you do with your freedom? It's the same question I asked our high schoolers. What do you want to know? What do you want to be able to do? These are questions that each of us alone can answer. What are you going to do with your high school experience, with the years and opportunities before you? But first we have to ask, are you ready? Let's go back to the beginning of her essay and remember that this freedom is not automatically granted to everyone because they've hit a certain age. It is granted to those who have been prepared for it. So have you or your student been properly prepared? This is a very serious question. A huge part of my job is trying to figure out how to create a school program for the lower students that prepares students for this very thing. But many curriculums aren't aimed at this kind of freedom at all. And so for many of our upper school students, they have not been prepared for the kind of freedom that they should have, and therefore will still have quite a bit of work to do. And this can be on a sort of, I wouldn't say moral necessarily side, but a sort of personal side. Like, we try to give them the reading room for them to have as their own. And we were just talking today, everyone just breaks all our rules all the time. And it's like, we're giving you this freedom. Like, we're placing before you a place that is your very own, and all you're going to do is use your cell phone because we told you not to. Like, that's such a stupid waste of a freedom that we put in front of you. And it's because no one has really asked that of them before. High schoolers tend to get into these positions in which, in order to express freedom, they have to rebel against the person who's oppressing them. And so we're trying very hard to create a different sort of relationship between the students and teachers. But it's not easy because we're working against a lot of years of practice. And then on the academic side, there are questions that I think all of us really need to ask ourselves. Do you know how to read? Like, really, really read. To think through a hard, challenging, long, unusual text and understand it? Can you ask good questions about things that you read and see because you've understood what they're trying to communicate with you? We have lots of students who come from lots and lots of different schools. Nobody can read well. Nobody. Doesn't matter how expensive your last school was. There are very few students who are coming to us truly, even to a point of being like curiously literate. Sometimes we have students who read a certain kind of book for fun, or say they're a certain kind of reader, but they're not someone that you could give any text to and say, okay, what does this say? Which seems to me to be a pretty basic bar for reading. Are you numerate? Do you understand why math works the way it does, so that you are capable of building new and more interesting, more beautiful problems worth solving? Are you a careful observer of the natural world so that you're ready to tackle the intricacies of physics or chemistry or advanced biology? Have you really paid attention to the trees, to the weather? Why not? Have you mastered these skills? If not, you might be still in the grammar stage of your education, the one we were meant to graduate from about 11. And this year, I've told the high schoolers, needs to be dedicated to learning the foundational skills of literacy. The bad news for them is that they are woefully behind the peers of 100 years ago, much less several hundred years ago. The good news is that all of us are completely empowered to fix it. One of the benefits of being a little older is that you can catch up quite easily if you apply yourself to it. My first day of college, I had been admitted into an honors program that Dr. Reynolds founded and was running, and we were the top 10% of students, feeling pretty good about ourselves, and we got to orientation, and he came in the room and said, "Welcome to Victorian Junior High." It was very disappointing. Dedicate yourselves to truly understanding the books in your great books class or books on your shelf at home, to increasing your vocabulary and becoming a truly capable, clean, and intelligent writer. I have asked our high schoolers to get Mrs. Nockshoe or Mrs. Muller to help them relearn the functions of mathematics if they've forgotten them. Memorize times tables if you have to, and play around with numbers. If you feel confident in these skills, then ask yourself, how am I at the dialectic? If you're in a great books class or having a hard conversation, how well do you understand the objection of the person in front of you or the challenges from a teacher? How good are you at questioning an author's assumption or his conclusion? How often do you find yourself questioning speeches or sermons that you hear outside of school? If you've mastered the grammar of the thing, it is time to be sure that you're practiced and you've been practicing the logic stage. Are you dedicated to finding the truth? Not what you think or believe about a thing, because we often have those in kind of impressions that we inherit or adopt easily, but the real, hard, foundational truths. Are you dedicated to digging and fighting for them? Are you quick to wonder why? Are you great at engaging in conversation the people around you? If you've mastered the how and you've dug hard into the why, if our students have done the hard work of understanding the principles on which this world is built and engaging the histories, stories, and ideas that it has been built with, maybe they are ready for high school, as Sayers sees it. Maybe then we're all ready for freedom. Freedom to explore, freedom to create beautiful pieces of writing and art and music, and freedom to study what you yourself needs to study. We try to give our students tastes of this freedom wherever they are in their studies. We have them choose their own paper topics in great books class because we want them to invest their time in work that seems interesting and good for them. I don't know which of the texts in my class, there's about 30 of them, are going to really catch a student's imagination or attention, or be something that they know they need to work on and practice and really figure out. But I asked them at retreat, especially solely for our returning students, how many times have you squandered this opportunity by instead choosing a text that you think will be the easiest? That's a lost opportunity to do something with the freedom that is put in front of you. We do oral exams whenever we can throughout the school because we want our students to have a say in guiding the examination towards those things that they've thought really well about. So I asked them, how often have you surprised your examiner? How often have you surprised me or Mr. Gilbert or Mr. Yee or Mr. Muller by knowing more than we expected them to? Our seniors last year in Great Books were all able to do this. All of our oral exams turned into wonderful conversations in which we got to trust that they had done the work and just hear the interesting things they had to say. So I asked, particularly our juniors and seniors, are you able to do this year? Do you have any expectation that you're going to walk into an oral exam and we're going to have a wonderful conversation? Or are you scared about what instead will happen? But most importantly, I asked our high school students, what could high school look like if they were set free? and if they were truly free. Not free to do whatever they wanted to the detriment of their education and character, but free to go really deep and really far. Free to have their souls shaped, characters built, and imagination expanded. Sayers says that it should be difficult to create a syllabus for a high schooler because they are worthy of such freedom that it is demanded of the teachers that we give it to them. So we have to follow where they lead. I don't find it difficult to make syllabi for high schoolers because there's so much we're catching up on and so much that nobody knows. It should be hard for me to have 7 kids in a class because they all need to go in these wildly different, amazing directions. And it's not that hard. They're doing great work. They're doing wonderful work. But we're still definitely in a syllabus stage. Sayers says that it should be difficult to create this syllabus because they are worthy of such freedom. Tomorrow, or when at the retreat, we talked the next night about how this same principle could be applied to the rules of our school. That we weren't interested in just applying a bunch of rules on top of them and making them bend to it, but telling them why we set the rules we did, from everything from uniform to cell phone use, why we allow them to wander the fields if they want to, or any of those things. And I think it's important that we do both, that we allow for both these moral forming freedoms and the academic ones. And so we have to ask, what should our students be studying? What do they need to spend the year doing? Some of them will need to be rooting themselves in the grammar of the world around them, learning and relearning to read and write and think on a more adult level. Some of them will need to focus on argumentation and questioning and immersing themselves in logic and debate and dialogue and questions. But if they do those things, if they take their education in their own hands and make sure that they are prepared, which in some ways only they can do, if they do that, then at long last we get to ask this question. After years of hard work and dedication, learning the skills that teach us how to learn, learning the facts and the history and the ways of the world around you, are you ready to be set free? Are you ready to become an artist whose work is their very life, their very education and pursuits? Do you want to be free? A lot of people say they want freedom, but what they actually want is a kind of slavery to base desires or inabilities, to a lack of character. I am not free to play the piano the way Miss Holt can play the piano because I have not done the work. I can play it poorly, but I'm not free to play it well. We talked a little bit about what Augustine or Boethius would say about a kind of freedom and inability, that it's not freedom at all, that it's a privation of a good. And who would want less good? Lots of people want less good, it turns out, because having less good is often much easier than pursuing real good. This is the pursuit, the opportunity that we are dedicating to putting before our upper school. We want to surround them by a group of educators, friends, and mentors who want them to become adults in the fullest sense of the term. Someone who can see the world the way it is and make good and true value judgments, living their life accordingly. Someone who can create a good and meaningful life, helped along by the great traditions of education that came before them, and we hope will continue long after our students graduate. We're working towards creating someone who can be free, happy, whole, and free. Education is the training ground on which that kind of person is made. And all we need to find out is what needs to happen to get them there. And that's our job as teachers, to help to grow them to a point where they can be set free.